She's had the honor of being the disciple of musical stalwarts like Sangita Acharya Srimati Late Sita Lakshmi Venkateshan, Padma Bhushan Shri P.S. Narayana Swami, and Sangita Sagaram Srimati Vegavahini Vijayaraghavan. She has performed in several venues and has won many awards. Vidwan Rithvik Raja is yet another eminent vocalist of this generation. He began learning Carnatic music and had his initial training under Srimati Sudha Raja, his mother, for vocal music. Subsequently, after grasping and understanding of the basic foundation for 6 years, he was trained by Srimati Sulochana Pattabhiraman for 2 years. And at the age of 13, he started learning from Sangita Kalanidhi Vidwan Shri T.M. Krishna. Vidwan Rithvik Raja has also traveled far and wide for his concerts and other collaborations, alongside receiving several laurels to his credit. We now request Srimati Gauri Ramnarayan to honor the artist on behalf of Guru Guhamrita. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you very much. First, at the outset, we'd like to, of course, thank Guru Guhamrita for this wonderful 6-day festival. I've been here every day and it's been fabulous. And mostly for giving us a topic like this, because in the course of trying to find information, data, doing research on this, we both personally learned a lot. And I think that was the most enriching part of this. The presentation is only happening, but in terms of how much fun we had putting this together is something that maybe we'll speak about at a different time, but it's been wonderful to do this. So thank you. And again, I think we can't start this Legdom without, of course, thanking Muthuswami Dikshitar for his genius and sharing it so freely to so many people, because of which we have multiple sources and accesses today that enabled us to be able to put this presentation together. And we've literally just scratched the surface. So I think seeing most of the other presentations in the previous day, we know how much more there is to see. So I think fitting that in his 250th year, he's being celebrated the way he's meant to be. And of course, to Subbarama Dikshitar also for the magnum opus publication, Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini, which is the most effective and comprehensive archive of an entire raga system that we would have otherwise lost if not for his work. So having said this, there are a few disclaimers that I'd like to first place on the record. One, what we are presenting today is based on publicly available data. I'm sure there are many exceptions, so this is not exhaustive but more representative. So that is one thing to be kept in mind. Second thing is, we are grateful to all of the different paramparas, the artists and the musicologists who've taken the effort over the last 150 years to record their perspectives, interpretations of Dikshitar compositions, because of which we have such a large variety of material available with which we've been able to come to some sort of a judgment of our own. But again, having said that, since this is going to be data-based, I think it's important for us to say that as much as we treat Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini as an important marker, we are also looking at compositions that have come into the Carnatic music fold after that. So just in terms of distinguishing between different sources, we will be using the terms SSP and non-SSP, which is Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini and non-Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. This is not a judgment. We all have our personal opinions about this, but this is purely for classification to put this presentation in perspective. Also, we are going to try and cover as much as possible till 1975, because that's where the data is lesser available in terms of public sources. From I think 1975 till present day 2025, in those 50 years we have a lot more concerts and public resources, even many recordings on YouTube available that also I think in a way informs us of a collective memory in the recent past. So we will be focusing on the time before that to see what actually brought us to where we are today and how the changes have taken place from 75 to 2025. So we are going to try and be as unbiased as possible. Again, it's impossible to do that, but in terms of data, when we are looking at data, irrespective of how we may perceive the data tells its own story. So we've tried our best to follow the data. So we will start with the family tree of Muthuswami Dikshitar. With the family tree and the Sishya Paramparas and all of the trees that we are going to present, I want to place on record that they're not exhaustive. We have only presented what we need in terms of the requirements of this particular presentation. There was a lecture yesterday on the Sishya Parampara which was very exhaustive, and many students that even many of us didn't know about through our research. So that is not the aim of this. The aim of this is to present data of compositions that were sung, presented, that we have available today. So from this, we see that Muthuswami Dikshitar, born in 1775, we are celebrating his 250th year this year, was born to Ramaswamy Dikshitar and Subbalakshmi. The interesting thing here is, again, this is not a history lesson on his life history because we want to get to the topic as soon as possible, but this family tree is important because of the other name at the right end, Subbarama Dikshitar. Subbarama Dikshitar was actually born to Balaswami Dikshitar's daughter, but at the advice of the king at Nettayapuram, he adopted his own grandson. And until Balaswami Dikshitar's death, Subbarama Dikshitar was with him, learned music of his parampara from his grandfather/father. So that is one thing that we want to place on record first. We will come back to why Subbarama Dikshitar is an important person here. In terms of who Subbarama Dikshitar is, we know that he wrote the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshani, but in terms of what that text entails, we will also be looking at soon. But first, we'd like to see the earliest records available in text of Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions. There are, of course, many anecdotes that we've all heard through different sources. There are many texts that also record, index Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions. The earliest recordings we have of Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions being sung today are the 78 RPM records. There are also innumerable press clippings, souvenirs, and conferences from which we can gather a lot of interesting data. So as you can see, the first tab was 1775 to 1906. 1906 is when Subbarama Dikshitar passes away. So we are going to have a look at what happens from that period until 1932, what are the resources that are available to us, and what inference we can gather. In terms of Mahavaidyanatha Iyer, who is from the Tyagaraja Sishyam Parampara and one of the most prolific performers towards the last end of the 18th century and early 19th century, we hear that he performs compositions like Vatapi Ganapatim, Chintai Ma Kandamulam, and many other compositions. There was a story presented here yesterday that the way he learned the Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions were actually by listening to Subbarama Dikshitar sing them, and Shri V. Sri Ram mentioned that when he presented those compositions back, Subbarama Dikshitar was not happy. I heard another story similar to this that supports this from a different source, that apparently when he performed this in a concert, Subbarama Dikshitar and Mahavaidyanatha Iyer's brother, Ramaswamy Shivan, were in the audience. And apparently, with how Mahavaidyanatha Iyer sang the composition Vatapi Ganapatim, Subbarama Iyer was unhappy, like how he mentioned, and was staring at him. And Ramaswamy Shivan, sitting in the audience right next to him, apparently noticed that and turned and continued to stare at him. Almost in a way of saying, oh, okay, we may be from a different parampara, but you know, we are taking the effort to sing almost. And then I was told another line that I cannot repeat here. But in terms of how I think even these exchanges have happened, people from across paramparas have picked up these compositions. It's very interesting that in terms of how this assimilation happens, because we also think of paramparas as being very rigid and people from one guru refusing to take from other styles or other gurus or other paramparas. But when we look at history, when we look at the multiple sources from which people learned from even as early as 1900s, we know that it wasn't as rigid, or it was probably a lot more fluid and flexible. Now in terms of texts and books, one of the important texts is from 18th December 1893. This was the Oriental Music in European Notation, the first issue of this text by A.M. Chinnaswamy Mudaliar. He is also the person who supports Subbarama Dikshitar and is instrumental in bringing out the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshani later in 1904. But when we look at his text in 1893, this is actually a monthly periodical. So it's almost like one huge book of compositions in Oriental notation that are deconstructed and published over many months. There are pros and cons to this. The pros is that it's maybe a little more accessible, but the con is that it's almost like one book has been disintegrated and published over different periods of time. So which means to find one copy of that book is not sufficient. If there are 12 issues, you need to find all 12 of those to get a comprehensive idea of what this text was like. But interestingly, we have the first issue. And in the first issue, he lists the index of every composition he plans to release in all of the further issues. So when we look at this index, he lists 36 compositions of Muthuswamy Dikshitar. This is the first time we have such a comprehensive index list of Muthuswamy Dikshitar. And all of these compositions are ones that are in the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshani. But today, in terms of what text we have remaining from this book, we have notations for only 6 of them and a few notuswarams, among which Kalavati Kamalasana Yuvati, Tyagarajo Virajate in Athana, Mahaganapate in Natanarayani, Sri Vishwanatham the Chaturdasha Ragamalika, and Veena Pustaka Dharini. These are the compositions for which we have surviving notations from that text. The second set of books around that time that predate the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshani are the ones published by the Tachur brothers and later by Tachur Singarachalu. The interesting thing with this book also is that it is over multiple volumes. So the book 3, part 2, called Sangita Kalanidhi, has an index of 9 Muthuswamy Dikshitar compositions. Book 4, Gayaka Lochanam, has 16 compositions that also includes the Navagraha Kritis. Interestingly, the Navagraha Kritis are also mentioned in the index by Chinnaswamy Mudaliar. I will tell you why this is important in just a little while. Book 5 has Gayaka Siddhanjam. The part 1 has 23 Muthuswamy Dikshitar compositions in it, and part 2 has 13 of them. The total comes up to 61 songs across these books. All of these are in Telugu, but the interesting thing again is that all these 61 songs are those which are found in the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshani. Now we can draw a few observations from these two texts that predate the SSP. One is that many songs were common between both these texts. So it is fair of us to assume that maybe in this number of 61, many of them were popularly sung at that point, many of them were in vogue, and many of them were in common practice. The second interesting thing to note here is that both these books have the Navagraha Kirtana list, but both of them publish the list without the compositions on Rahu and Ketu. Next, we come to 1904, the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshani. Again, I'm not going to go into the history of the book or why the book is important. We are going to try and use this, as I said, like a baseline for the data that we are going to present. But in terms of a short history of this book, it is without a doubt a landmark publication in Carnatic music and South Indian musicology history, because it's not just something that provides notation, it's something that provides oral tradition, something that gives us an insight into an entire raga history and the Raganga Ragas, which we would have probably lost if not for this book. The book also acts as a key resource for preserving historical knowledge. Just in terms of the Vagayakara Charitramu, the amount of information he offers about composers that we would not have known too much about if not for the book is also important. The book is also the most detailed notation of Carnatic music to date with Gamaka symbols. There are almost 15 Gamaka symbols in that book, and the story is that A.M. Chinnaswamy Mudalayar had to make separate what they call Ach to be able to print, a separate type font, to be able to print these Gamaka signs on the book. And for how old Subbarama Dikshitar was already by the time he was putting this book together, for him to have gone through and so meticulously made sure every Gamaka symbol was in place, then after publication, having gone through the book and published an errata with corrections on that is unimaginable. And the fact that even till today, notation in Carnatic music is still being discussed about, we still don't have a solution, and we still feel that something that most effectively in some manner communicated the music is that text almost 120 years ago is really fascinating to me personally. And the most important thing about the book is it is a singularly valuable resource in understanding the Dikshitar Sampradaya in multiple ways. If you read through the book, it's not just him listing out the songs that he knows or sharing the notations for them. Through the course of the book, he offers commentary on ragas, he shares many little stories, he talks about how ragas, while in the last 20 years, even in his time has changed or is in the process of changing. He talks about how some ragas have started taking in one extra note, or a note has changed, or how the raga is undergoing change, and all of this is given seamlessly as part of the book. So the book is fascinating also because each time you open even the same composition that maybe you've looked at a year ago, you find new things in it. And I think that is the beauty of any art, according to me. But how we are going to use the SSP today is, one, as an authenticator of Sampradaya as the baseline, as an indicator of what was in vogue during Subbarama Dikshitar's time and when the book was published in 1904, and as a differentiator in what comes after. So having said this, the earliest records of audio that we have of Muthuswamy Dikshitar compositions being sung are the 78 RPM recordings. So here you will see the earliest recordings available. Like I said, I'm talking about the period after the book, after the demise of Subbarama Dikshitar, from 1906 to 1932. So in that period, we find 9 Muthuswamy Dikshitar compositions released in 78 RPMs. The earliest one is in 1905, 1 year after the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini is published. That recording is by Kanchipuram Danakoti Ammal, who performed Sri Subramanyaya Namaste. She was the aunt of Kanchipuram Nayana Pillai, who is of course an illustrious singer and who has taught many students like Brinda Mukta and many others. We will come to that Sishya Parampara a little later. And here you see other compositions: Neelakantam Bhajayam, Vatapi Ganapatim, Sri Subramanyaya again, Sri Saraswati, Neerajakshi, Kamakshi, Mayetvam, Kamalambam Bhajare, sung by many different artists. And again, something to note is all of them are compositions from the SSP. We will play 2 or 3 samples from this quickly. We are going to restrict the amount that we are able to play, unfortunately, because we have a lot to cover. So I do feel bad about having to already think of cutting the music, but you all will have to excuse me for that. think that's a good place to stop. um, you can see automatically that the composition of a song like Sri Subramanya Namaste is much faster than what we are used to listening today. But it's also true that in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the speed of Carnatic music in general was much faster than what we sing today. Number one. Number two, it's also very interesting. Oh, let me clarify that this recording was of Salem Godavari, not of Danakoti Ammal. We could not find that recording, but this is from a 1916 recording. This is the earliest one we could find. We also have to talk about a couple of things that the 78 RPM automatically does. Because of the time limit, you automatically then have to restrict in some fashion certain compositions or increase the pace to be able to fit it within a certain time frame. So that is one aspect. The second aspect also is then what happens to the Kala Pramanam. Was this naturally the Kala Pramanam in which the composition was sung, or did that also have to be speeded up, or did they have to cut Sangadis? But the interesting thing with all the 78 RPM recordings that I have listened to is that what we are taught in the beginning in Carnatic music is every line has to be repeated twice. Every Sangati is sung twice. Whatever compromises they make, you will never see them singing a Sangati only once, which I think is very fascinating. In spite of so many restrictions, that they still stick to that. We will play two more recordings, one of Bidaram Krishnappa of 1916, singing Vatapi Ganapatim, and the recording in 1932 of Ariyakudi Ramajangar singing Kamalamma Bajare. Quick short samples. We'll move on to the next. Again, I have to apologize for cutting the music there, but it's just to provide a sample. The interesting thing also we see is that recording from 1932 by Arikudi Ramajangar, if you listen to the two 1916 recordings, in those 16 years, you can already see a shift in the way Carnatic music is sung. The two of those recordings in the 16s are much flatter. Even the proportion of the Kampita Gamaka is much shorter. Even by the time Arikudi is singing just about 16 years later, you can see that there's been a actually a massive shift in terms of how the Kampita is sung. And today we kind of identify the sound of Carnatic music with the sound of that Kampita Gamkam. So that's an interesting observation there as well. Quickly, before I hand over to Aishwarya, there are just a couple more things. Then, like I said, we also had souvenirs and multiple other sources also that we have some record from. One is the Music Academy Journal of 1929. But before that, we also have detailed reports of the All India Music Conference from 1916, which was held in Baroda for the first time, where V.N. Bhatkande, who also has an interesting story with Subbarama Dikshitar that we'll come to at a later time, was appointed as the chair during that conference. And the topics that are discussed range from Ragabhava, Ragalakshana, Sampradaya, and even texts like Chaturdandi Prakashika. And I think that report is probably the earliest that we have of physical interactions or conferences in terms of what people say or how things are spoken about in that point of time. The Music Academy was started in 1929, right after the All India Conference in 1927 that coincided with the annual session of the Indian National Conference here in Chennai. The 1929 journal report carries some very interesting conversations pertaining to Muthuswami Dikshitar. In 1929, on 20th October, there was a whole day dedicated to Muthuswami Dikshitar. And the information we have is that there was an interesting lecture presented by T.L. Venkatramayar, and songs of Muthuswami Dikshitar were ably presented by Tiger Varadacharya, Sharma Devi Subramanya Shastri, Marur Subramanya Iyer, and Parur Sundaram Iyer. We have this on record. Of course, along with those journals, there are of course multiple notes of Sampradaya from the Dikshitar Parampara. And it's also interesting that the Music Academy in the 30 notes that after the success of the Muthuswami Dikshitar Day in 1929, other organizations in Madras are also celebrating Dikshitar Day from 1930, which is also noted. There is also a report of a lecture on luminaries of the Dikshitar line, starting from Govinda Dikshitar, that is written by Sambamurthy in that same journal. Before I hand over to Aishwarya on 1932, in 1931, the Academy Journal also mentions Ambi Dikshitar. This is the first time you're hearing that name, but I will, when we move on from the next part, you will see his name appear in the Shishya Parampara, and you will know why he's an important person for this conversation. We have a record of Ambi Dikshitar being present and actively participating in the discussions at the Music Academy, and the Academy Journal refers to him as Mr. Muthuswami. Ambi Dikshitar's birth name is actually Muthuswami Dikshitar. And he also composed compositions and used the mudra Guru Guha. So that also is an interesting thing that you will probably need to see how we are putting this data together. As early as then, we also have mentions of other compositions that we don't see sung, like Brihadamba, Brihadishwaro, etc. There are Raga Lakshana discussions even then on Vasanta and Lalita with respect to Muthuswami Dikshitar's compositions. And from 32 onwards, it's not just reports and journals, but we have the souvenirs available. So I will let Aishwarya take over from there.
So this period between 1932 and 1943 is very exciting, and we can draw many inferences and conclusions from this based on data available to us. We have with us Music Academy journals that have many reports and discussions on conversations centered specifically around Muthuswami Dikshitar. The All India Radio and its journal, The Indian Listener, came to Madras in 1938 and lists concerts with their song lists and artists printed once every fortnight. Souvenirs from the Academy also have song lists with artists printed from 1932 available to us. Indian fine art souvenirs from some years offer another source that validates data also from the Music Academy. And this is thanks to Dwaram Venkataswamy Naidu, who donated his archives to the Music Academy, available as of last year. We also have multiple paper cuttings from newspapers like The Hindu, which carry mentions of compositions of Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar. So let's take a look at the academic souvenirs and journals, where we find all compositions rendered but one that are from the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. We will talk about this one composition a little later. We also see a lot of conversations in the academic sessions where there are multiple discussions on the learning and understanding of Raga Lakshanas and that of the Dikshitar Sampradaya. The first ever composition of Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar recorded in the Music Academy souvenir is in 1932. And this is by none other than Vidwan Sri Mushri Subramanya Iyer singing Sri Subramanyaya Namaste on 24th December 1932. Now, after sifting through years of data that have been available to us, meticulously collected and curated and preserved by the Music Academy, here are some very, very exciting observations. Some of the most oft rendered compositions are Vatapi Ganapatim, sung 13 times, but 9 unique artists. Sri Mahaganapati in Gaula, sung 8 times by 8 different artists. Kamalambam Bajare and Akshay Linga Vibho, sung 6 times by 5 different artists. Now, the first composition sung outside the Pradarshini is Mahaganapatim Vande in Todi. The total number of Dikshitar compositions rendered at this time is 159. Unique compositions amongst these is 54. Some of these compositions rendered are Veena Pustakadharinim, Tyagaraja Yoga Vaibhavam, Swaminatha, Suryamurte, Sri Saraswati, Sri Nilotpalanaike. I leave it to you to look at some of the other compositions for paucity of time. Now, this one composition that found its way amongst the others rendered at this time period, Mahaganapatim Vande in Todi, was first sung on the 1st of January 1937 by Sri Aryakudi Ramanujayengar, followed by Sri G.N. Balasubramaniam on 2nd Jan 1938 and 1st Jan 1941. Now, another interesting name, Chittur Subramanya Pillai, who one would not assume or associate with Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar instantly, has sung some fabulous compositions of Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar in this time frame. 7 compositions, of which 6 have been uniquely rendered only by him. So some of these compositions, Sri Dakshinamurte, Shankaram Abhirami, Mahaganapate, Kusumakaram, which we haven't heard for so many decades after this, Sri Bhargavi, Sri Dum Durge, Balakrishnam Bhavayami. Tiger Varadacharya was one of the artists to sing more than one Dikshitar Kriti per concert. We see that he sung Vatapi, Tyagaraja Namaste and Ramachandram Bhavayami in one single concert on the 24th of December, 1935. Sri Mudikondan Venkatrama Iyer has also sung Neerajakshi, Chetashri and Sri Mata in one concert again. Lot of very, very beautiful compositions that we may not have thought was rendered on the concert platform at that time. The All India Radio also lists a whole bunch of artists who, many of whom did not sing in the academy at that time frame. Balamba and Sugandhi sing Sri Mahaganapati in Gaula. The first ever Dikshitar composition on AIR was on the 1st of January 1939, sung by this duo. The earliest composition outside of this Pradarshini on record, sung at the All India Radio, is Smaramyaham, sung by Puvanur Srinivasa Bhagavadar in 1939. The first ever full Dikshitar special program was presented by Lakshmi Narasimhan on the 4th of January 1939, which included compositions like Sri Subramanyaya Namaste, Bala Gopala, Cheta Shri Balakrishnam, Sri Venugopala. All India Radio features many unique compositions of Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar, which were not seen on concert stages yet at this time, which includes Music Academy and Indian Fine Arts. Most concerts seem to actually feature Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions at this time, which one may not have thought. Unlike the 15-20 compositions that we seem to associate with this time frame, we see over 50 compositions rendered at this time on the concert platform. Another interesting source is, of course, our 78 RPMs. Srimati D.K. Pattamal establishes herself as an authority on Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions. We see compositions such as Manasa Guruguha, which she has sung so beautifully in 1938, Sri Venugopala, Mamava Pattabhirama, Musiri Subramanya Iyer's fame, of course, which we will listen to. does not want to pause. So one very interesting observation from all the 78 RPM records that we see is that there are many unheard artists, including many women artists, who render compositions on this medium. However, we find less than 100 Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions from over 1,000 Carnatic music compositions rendered in this period, including repetitions. Musri Subramania Iyer's, of course, famed Neerajakshi Kamakshi composition he was synonymously associated with, was performed for the 78 RPM records in 1934. Many popular artists began to record Dikshitar compositions in this medium. Like I said earlier, the percentage was a fraction, and still over the following decades continues to be a fraction. Even artists like Sri Shemmangudi Srinivasa Iyer have never recorded a Dikshitar Kriti on this medium. So the other resources over this time that are available to us that give us a bird's eye view of Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar's influence on the concert platform: Indian fine arts, old souvenirs still available, but many are lost over time. Parthasarathi Swami Sabha, many concerts continue to be held at the Parthasarathi Swami Sabha at this time, but only a sample is available through reviews and news articles. Music Academy journals offer lots of interesting nuggets on information regarding discussions, raga lakshanas, shrutis, and so on in this Dikshitar Sampradaya. And many texts, reviews in Tamil weekly issues, lots of written books in Tamil released during this period that make compositions accessible to the public, make compositions accessible to musicians. Now Rithvik is going to take you through some of these books that are a little conduit between what happened here and what we see is likely to happen in the next decade. Over to you, Rithvik.
Thank you. So we've moved on till 1943. And the next chunk of 11 years is 1943 to 1954. But to understand what happens as a progression in terms of the new compositions that come into the fold, especially of performance, we need to see also what happens during this time period of 1932 to 43 that takes some time for it to see results in the next 1 or 2 decades. So for that, let me first go through the Sishya Parampara of Muthuswami Dikshitar. Again, this is not exhaustive. This lists the paramparas that we need for us to explain the next progression as part of this presentation. So one of the people who learned from Muthuswami Dikshitar, Shuddhamadalam Thambi Appaya, was belonged to the Thiruvarur temple. And he was the guru of Satanur Panchanada Iyer, from whom Tirupamburam Natarajasundaram Pillai, who wrote a book which we will come to, and Veena Dhanammal learned from. One of the other student lines of Muthuswami Dikshitar are the Tanjore Quartet. K.P. Shivanandam, the Veena artist, Sangita Kalanidhi, is a descendant of the Tanjore Quartet. He didn't directly learn from them. But he is also important here because his son, Mr. Shivakumar, who lives in Chennai, still has written manuscripts by the Tanjore Quartet, which we will also speak about. The next lineage is through Tevur Subramanya, whose student was Ettaipuram Ramachandra Bhagavatar, from whom a host of artists learnt. Similarly, Sundarama Iyer was his student, who was Mudikondan Venkatrama Iyer's guru. Rajam Bhagavatar learned from him, from whom Madhurmani Iyer learnt. Madurai Pushpavanam and other famous artists of the early 1900s learned from him. And the first artist, Sri Subramanyaya Namaste, not the one we played, but in 1905, Kanchipuram Dhanakoti Ammal was also a student of Ettaipuram Ramachandra Bhagavatar, from whom Nayana Pillai learnt, and from whom Chittur Subramanya Pillai and multiple others learnt. So, having established this, the fourth lineage we've already seen till Subbarama Dikshitar in the first slide. His son, Ambi Dikshitar, who we referenced as being part of the discussions in the 1929 Music Academy Journal, was also called Muthuswami Dikshitar. That was his birth name. His students are the Kalladakuruchi brothers, Kalladakuruchi Anantakrishna Iyer and Kalladakuruchi A. Sundaram Iyer. And from Ambi Dikshitar also learned T.L. Venkatrama Iyer and D.K. Patamal and a host of others. But before we speak about that, we also have to speak about Vedanta Bhagavatar and Ramalinga Bhagavatar. Vedanta Bhagavatar is said to have learnt directly from Subbarama Dikshitar and then from Ambi Dikshitar. Ramalinga Bhagavatar was Vedanta Bhagavatar's brother, but who learnt from Vedanta Bhagavatar. Their student is Mahadeva Bhagavatar, who lived until very recently, much into the 2000s. So we have direct lineages for many of these people. In fact, students of T.L. Venkatrama Iyer, who you see as a student of Ambi Dikshitar, are illustrious musicians we've all heard of, like D.K. Patamal, of course, who learnt a lot from him, B. Rajamayar, Sandhyavandanam Srinivasa Rao, and many others. In fact, in 1975, during the bicentenary of Muthuswami Dikshitar, we also see Ramalinga Bhagavatar presenting a lecture at the Music Academy on the day Shemmangudi Srinivasa Iyer chaired the session. And there are recordings of him singing Angarakkam, Budhamashrayami, and Sri Lakshmi Varaham in Apugi. Now, if we look at the books in the 1900s, after the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. Okay, before we go to that, I will just give you a history about the books. After 1900, the first book we see is published in 1934 by Kalladakuruchi Anantakrishna Iyer. The name of the book is Gana Manjusha, in which he offers some Dikshitar compositions. But the path-breaking book at that time that offered a comprehensive view of Dikshitar compositions and notations in Tamil was the book by Tirupamburam Natarajasundaram Pillai. The name of the book was Dikshitar Kirtana Prakashikai, and that book had 50 compositions. The interesting thing about the book is when Aishwarya mentioned that out of so many compositions that were presented in the Music Academy from 1906 to 1932 till 1943, there was only one composition that was outside of the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. That composition was Mahaganapatim Mande in Thodi. In the book of Tirupamburam Natarajasundaram Pillai, out of those 50 compositions, the only non-SSP composition that we see in that book is also Mahaganapatim Mande. There is another interesting link here. This book was written in 1936. The year in which Aryakudi Ramanuja sings this composition at Music Academy is 1st January 1937, immediately after the book is published. Until then, we don't find any mention of this composition in any other written history. So that is one important thing that we have to keep in mind. Natarajasundaram Pillai and his son, Tirupamburam Swaminatha Pillai, who played the flute, are also credited with popularizing Sri Vishwanatham first. And the next book after 1936, the Natarajasundaram Pillai book that we see, is Guruguha Ganamrita Varshini. They came out in two parts, part 1 and part 2. Part 1 was released in 1936 that had the Navavarana Kirtanams. But along with the Navavarana Kirtanams, there were two other compositions, Sri Mahaganapati and Sri Balasubramanya. In 1937, we have the Navagraha book. Again, both of these books are written by Kalladakuruchi Anantakrishna Iyer, along with the support of Vedanta Bhagavatar. The interesting thing about the Navagraha book in 1937 is, apart from the 7 compositions that are colloquially called Vara Kirtanams, that we saw listed in the 1893 book of Chinnaswamy Mudaliar and subsequently by Tachur. The beautiful aspect about this book is that it also for the first time mentions the 2 other compositions in Rahu and Ketu, on Rahu and Ketu. And apart from that, it seems to be a custom where even in the 36th book, the book apart from the Navavarana Kirtanams has 1 composition on Ganesha and 1 on Subramanya. Similarly, this book also has 2 compositions, one on Ganesha, which is Karikalabamukam. The first time we see this non-SSP composition also, and Kumaraswaminam in Asaveri on Lord Subramanya, but this is a composition in Asaveri that is there in the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. Now, again, on All India Radio, when Aishwarya mentioned, she said in 1938, we have the first time Smaramyaham is sung. This book of Navagraha is released in 1937. Exactly a year before, we see that composition come into vogue. So as much as musicians in those days didn't necessarily learn from books or set up compositions from notations, it is possible that maybe a very few percentage of them did, or maybe it is also possible because they had their own music school in Chennai from the early 1930s, which was set up in Royapeta. They also had branches in those days in Mylapore and Mambalam. So maybe the person who performed Smaramyaham in the All India Radio in 1938 had some connection to them, or maybe in some way learned from them. Now, having seen this, this raises a few interesting questions before we go on to the next period of 43 to 54, when we see a lot more changes come in. We know from available data that apart from Mahaganapati Mande, no other composition had been sung. But the fact that somebody related to the same Sishya Parampara, like Ramalinga Bhagavatar, sings Sri Lakshmi Varaham in Abogi, which is a raga that does not exist in the Dikshitar Sampradaya, is interesting to think about. Again, I am not passing a judgment here. I have my own opinions, but I'm just placing the facts on the record because this is more about the data that is available. Interestingly, in 1941, we also see Kalladakurchi A. Sundaramayar, who is Kalladakurchi Anantakrishna Iyer's cousin, start to publish the Dikshitar Kritimani Male from 1941. And that is a volume of 14 books where he starts to publish many compositions that nobody has ever heard of before that. From 1948, he also consistently publishes 2 compositions every year in the Music Academy Journal, which was at the behest of Dr. V. Raghavan, who was very close to Sundaramayar. But this was not a new practice. In 43, Mushiri Subramanyayar had already given the notation and details of a composition, Vadanyeshwaram, in the Music Academy Journal that also did not exist in public knowledge before then. And he gives it with notation. And the interesting thing here is that he is also similarly Sundaramayar's student who has a different lineage to Muthuswami Dikshitar. Subsequently, he also then notates, I think in 45 or 46, the Kannada Gaula Kirtanam. And then from 48 onwards, consistently every year, we see 2 compositions, non-SSP compositions, being brought to the fore with notations and meaning in the Music Academy Journal. In 1929, through the journals, we also see T.V. Subbarao say something very interesting. He says, the Tachur and Subbarama Dikshitar books cannot be accepted as their views on theories have no bearing in the past or current practices. Which I find is a very interesting note for that time, just in terms of how these 2 books are valued even today. And the more you kind of dig into the journals, you see that there are 2 very stark schools. One with T.V. Subbarao, who believes that everything was in some way under the Tyagaraja Parampara. And diametrically opposite to him is T.L. Venkatramayar, who believes that even the Tyagaraja Parampara in some way followed the Dikshitar Parampara of Ragas. So in many of these discussions and composition and conversations, you see the 2 of them take diametrically opposite views. I think that warrants an entirely separate discussion on its own. But having seen all of this happening simultaneously, what is also important is that the books that we saw till now, that have been released by Kalladakurchi Anantakrishna Iyer and Kalladakurchi A. Sundaramayar, were supported a lot by T.L. Venkatramayar and others. In terms of who also learned these compositions from T.L. Venkatramayar, were stars of that day like D.K. Pattamal, for example. His student was B. Rajamayar, and we have an interview of his where he says many times he used to go back to his guru Aryakudi Ramajoyangar and sing these compositions. And many times Aryakudi would pick up these compositions from him and would present them on stage. These are important names. And T.L. Venkatramayar was also a very close associate of G.N. Balasubramaniam. What we see very interestingly happen from 1943 onwards is that the majority of the non-SSP compositions that begin to enter the concert stage are through these 3 people: D.K. Pattamal, G.N. Balasubramaniam, and Aryakudi Ramajoyangar. And it's also fascinating to see that G.N. Balasubramaniam was such a star that any composition he sings, within the next year, you see every youngster in the 3 o'clock slot in those days immediately singing. And you immediately see that composition gain popularity, which I think is fascinating. And also musicologists have always also believed that irrespective of how much effort or work is done by them, what ultimately carries through is through the popular performing artists of that time. And I think this is a wonderful example of that. So by 1943, we see some of the prominent and active propagators of Dikshitar compositions who do a lot to bring these new compositions on the stage. In terms of how this impacts many of the next 11 years, I will present the data, after which I will let Aishwarya take over. I am not going into this detail because we're already running short of time. Here are some interesting numbers. We already saw the numbers from 1932 to 43, but I am going to reiterate them. There were a total of 159 compositions sung of Muthuswami Dikshitar, and also between 32 and 43, the Music Academy conference was much shorter in time. It was only about a week, maybe a little more. The total unique compositions sung are 54, and out of the 54 compositions, only one was a non-SSP composition, which was Mahaganapati Mande. The interesting aspect of how things change in this next 11 years is from 159 compositions, we see that the total number of Dikshitar compositions rendered in the next 11 years goes up to 242, which is understandable because the number of concerts are more. But from 54, the number of unique compositions go up to 99, which means it's almost close to double. And from the ratio of 53 is to 1, we see the ratio of non-SSP compositions go up to more than 50%. Out of, if there are 64 SSP compositions, there are 35 non-SSP ones. So from only 1 being in circulation to the number increasing to 35 within the next decade is very important for us to take into account. If you also then look at this data in multiple ways, you also then know that out of the 45 new compositions, right, we have total unique compositions of 54 in the previous decade, 99 here. So there are 45 new compositions that enter the fold. Out of these 45 that enter, 34 of them, which is more than 75%, are non-SSP compositions. And especially from 1951 to 54, almost after 48, when these compositions are being printed in the journal, and you see the effect of the books printed before that come into action. In just those 4 years, from 51 to 54, we see that the non-SSP SSP to non-SSP numbers are far closer, 74 to 51. So that ratio becomes even more skewed. So the impact of all of these publications and concerted efforts to bring newer compositions, and I think by then performance was also becoming larger than life, and we saw more performances happening across different spheres. So artists also would have genuinely wanted to sing newer compositions, so they would constantly be on the lookout. So all of this is a factor in this. So these are some interesting numbers. The most popular composition in this decade are Shri Mahaganapati, which is sung 12 times by 9 unique artists, Meenakshi Memudam Dehi and Shri Subramanyaya Namaste, sung 9 times by 8 unique artists, and Tyagarajaya Namaste and Vatapi Ganapatim, sung 8 and 7 times by 5 unique artists. But the beautiful number here is that the total unique composition goes up to almost 100, even by 1950s, at which point we normally think, okay, maybe only 20 or 30 Dikshitar compositions were in circulation. That doesn't seem to be the case. And we also know many artists keep some compositions that they don't necessarily sing on stage. So this number in terms of how many compositions people knew could possibly be much more than this. So in those 11 years, we see 242 compositions being sung, 99 of them unique, and many of the unique compositions we hear for the first time, and only once are compositions like Anandeshwarena, sung by D.K. Patammal, Bharati Madhishana, Bhushavatim, Hastivadanaya, Kamakshi, Kamalambikaye, Kashi Vishweshwara, again sung by D.K. Patammal, Mahalakshmi, Mahasuram, Nagalingam Bajeham, which is played on the Veena by K.P. Shivanandam. So in terms of just the amount of data that is available to us, it is very fascinating to look at these numbers. Now, having looked at these numbers for the next decade until 1954, I'm going to pass it on to Aishwarya to take it from there.
We are now going to look at some of the forerunners of the Muthuswami Dikshitar brigade, starting with Justice T.L. Venkatrama Iyer, who was known to all of us as an ardent Muthuswami Dikshitar devotee and a disciple of Ambi Dikshitar. He was instrumental in publishing many books, participated in extensive Raga Lakshana discussions, Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions, and was also the president of the Music Academy from 1965 to 71. He also disseminated this knowledge very graciously to multiple students, and importantly, he spread the fire and love for Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions, passing the baton on to Dr. V. Raghavan. Some observations during this time frame. Shri G. N. Balasubramaniam was one of the first artists to introduce multiple Dikshitar compositions that we had not heard of till this point, that were not in the Pradarshani and not in active performance. Some of these, like Sarasa Dalanayana, Marakatavallim, Ekamranatham, and so on. Srimati D.K. Pattamal, another student of Shri T.L. Venkatrama Iyer and Ambi Dikshitar, was considered an authority on Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions and constantly added to her ever-growing repertoire on Muthuswami Dikshitar kritis. She too performed very beautiful compositions like Ehi Annapurne, Sarasadala, Akshayalinga Vibho, Subramanyena, Paradevata, and so on. Sandhya Vandanam Srinivasa Rao, in his first concert in the Music Academy, performed 3 compositions of Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar, Vallabhanayakasya, Sri Satyanaranam, and Nilotpalamikayai. He too was a student of Sri T.L. Venkatrama Iyer. Another of T.L. Venkatrama Iyer's disciples, B. Rajam Iyer, was one of these artists who constantly researched and realigned his thoughts on performance of Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions such as Anandeshwarena, compositions in the Raga Sahana, and so on. He would render compositions such as Sarasijanaba Sodari, Ramanatham Bajeham, and Smaramyaham. Smaramyaham we see appearing again.
These are all compositions only in this decade. Of course, they've sung many more compositions in the years after, but we are looking at this specific time period, just to clarify.
Between the periods of 1954 and 1961, we have some beautiful recordings to play for you. We will just play 1 or 2 before we move on to the next time frame.
Yeah. And this is also the first time from where we begin to have live concert representations of how Muthuswami Dikshitar's compositions were presented. Before 1954, we don't have any recordings of live concerts. Of course, this took some amount of resourcing and back-checking in terms of concerts that were available. What did the souvenirs say in terms of what songs they sang? Did that match with this concert list and all of that? So we are certainly quite sure that these were these represent those years along with these artists. We will play a couple of examples in this before we move on. So we have some of these recordings till 1961. The next decade and a half that we come to are 1961 and 1975. At the beginning and end of this time period, there are two milestone events that take place. 1961 sees the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini being translated to Tamil and automatically becoming more accessible. In 1975, we saw the bicentenary celebrations of Muthuswami Dikshitar at the Music Academy, and you just have to go through the journal and the souvenir available to see the different perspectives, how many different lectures and concerts that took place there. Now, in terms of talking about the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini, it was under the sponsorship of Sangeet Natak Academy undertaken by Dr. V. Raghavan. From here, we're not going to play too many more recordings because we want to get through the data that we have. Dr. S. Ramanathan spearheads the Ragalakshana portions of the translation, and B. Rajamayar spearheads the song portions of the translation. And this work is supervised by T.L. Venkatramayar, Dr. V. Raghavan, and Mudikondan Venkatramayar. The Dikshitar 200 celebrations by the Music Academy was conducted in such a grand manner, and Dr. V. Raghavan was instrumental in making this happen. Like I said, it brought so much awareness after that in terms of Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions to even many musicians who weren't actively singing those compositions before. We also have a couple of examples of that. Like, for example, if you see any concerts of Balamurali Krishna, before that, most of the concerts would have Tyagaraja compositions and his own compositions 95% of the time. He barely sang Muthuswami Dikshitar compositions until then. But in 1975, you see him sing a host of compositions that he probably prepared for this concert in 1975, Bogachaya, Uchishta Ganapatau, Dharma Samvardhini, Shridum Durge, Narasimhagacha, Shri Nilotpalla Naike, Ananda Natanam Prakasham, Shringara Rasamanjari, which is the 72nd Mela, Neelakantham Bajayam, Maye Tvam Yahi, Mama Pattabhirama. The very interesting aspect about this is, you see recordings after 1975, you see multiple recordings of him singing it. And interestingly, if you compare all of these songs and the way he sings it with his version and the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini version, from beginning to end, he does not add a single Sangati, because Sangatis were already in vogue by then. He does not add a single Sangati, and the notation from the beginning to end of the composition, including the Chittaswaram, Madhyamakala Sahityam, is followed to the T. And for things like this to happen, I think the bicentenary celebrations played a huge role. Here we also see, towards the end of this time period, around 69, 70, Shemmangudi Srinivasa Iyer sets up the Kamalamba Navavarna Kirtanams from the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini, and it is recorded first at the All India Radio and then played multiple times over during Navaratri. It was sung by Prema Jaya, S. Sita, Radha Warrior, and Visalakshi Ramachandra. And you have to go through those recordings to know how closely Shemmangudi Srinivasa Iyer has reinterpreted these compositions from the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini and created them. We are going to play literally 10 seconds or maybe just a little bit more of both of these examples. And now we will play the Balamurali Krishna example also. The song is Kaumari Gauri Velavali, and there is the notation. I will play just the Pallavi of it. You can literally watch and read along and see how he's interpreted that notation.
Gauri Velavali Gauri
So there are so many other things that happened during this time period, but one thing that is the most obvious is from 61 to 75, in those 14 years, you see that the number of newer compositions that come into the fold increase, and you see them almost take over the number of Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini compositions that were sung in this 5 to 2000, where the non-SSP compositions are far more greater in number in performance.
So between 1975 and 2000, we see that the number of Dikshitar kritis sung is close to even 200. There's a huge rise in the number of kritis, and yes, a little bit of a tilt towards non-SSP kritis versus SSP kritis. We also find that between 1925 and 1975, some of those compositions which were sung then are no longer sung now. We also see, interestingly, raga lakshana changes, raga nomenclature changes, addition of sangadis, and a kind of standardization in the rendition of Muthuswami Dikshitar kritis resembling Tyagaraja's in a sense. 1990 also saw the Panchalinga kritis being beautifully sung by Sri D.K. Jayaraman and his disciples. Interesting compositions which were sung at this time have also been Parandamavati, Kadambari, Madhurambikaya, Marakoti Lavanya, some of these compositions which we had never seen till now. Some forerunners that we ought to mention today are Srimati Kalpakam Swaminathan, disciple of Anantakrishna Iyer, T.L. Venkataramayar, Mushiri, Budalur Krishnamurti Shastri, Tiger, and Mysore Vasudevacharya. Dr. Vedavalli, we have to mention Sri V.V. Srivatsa and Sri S.R. Janaki Raman, disciple of Tiger, and Dr. N. Ramanathan, who also learned from Mahadeva Bhagavatar, who have been some of the most important forerunners of this time in disseminating and popularizing many compositions of Sri Muthuswami Dikshitar.
Before we wind up, the last portion of that is 2000 to 2025, which is the last 25 years. And the interesting aspect about that is 2004 saw the centenary of the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. And as we saw the previous 25 years, we've seen a huge increase in the number of newer compositions where the number shoots up to almost 200, which are just in performance. So in terms of practice, there were probably a lot more. But in 2004, with renewed energy almost, we see a lot of conversation rebuilding around the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. We see Music Academy have more lectures on the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini. We see a lot of people contributing in understanding its nuance, like people like Dr. N. Ramanathan, Dr. R.S. Jayalakshmi, and many others. And we also see our gurus, R.K. Sriram Kumar and T.M. Krishna, begin to audio archive the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini, which was never done before, and following the Gamaka system in the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini as it was. So if I played one of those recordings to you, it would sound very alien, but that was the interpretation of how the music sounded 120, 150 years ago. But the interesting thing that that project did was it revived interest in the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini, one. Two, it brought many conversations to the fore on the veracity, authenticity of compositions, and even compositions from the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini that are being sung in a very different way compared to how the actual notation is, how some of the ragas have undergone changes, how some of the nomenclatures we use are different. Like, for example, if suppose we sing Meenakshi Mimudam Dehi, should we call it Purvi Kalyani or Gamaka Kriya? And a bunch of these questions have is now something that people are more familiar with and are actively talking about. So in the last 20 years, it is very possible for us to say that because of increased awareness, access, the book being translated to English, online versions of this being available in multiple places, that the Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini and the compositions in it and understanding the Dikshitar Sampradaya has never been this widely spoken about in public spaces, maybe always in private spaces between artists, but in terms of conversation, in terms of how we see different people bringing up points in multiple different lectures and connecting the SSP in so many different ways, I think we are in a wonderful place today to celebrate the 250th year of Muthuswami Dikshitar with the conversation around also Sangita Sampradaya Pradarshini and all of the other compositions and how we can see them from a larger basket. And
a revival 100 years later of the compositions that we saw almost go into oblivion.
Yeah.
Back here in 2025, we see so many of those compositions continuing to be rendered, to being rendered on the concert platform again.
Yeah. So again, like we said, this is a presentation based on data that we have and not our own personal judgment. But the data shows very clearly what compositions were being sung, how it's moved, and where we are today. Where we may go from here, the soundscape of Dikshitar compositions and the concert platform are constantly changing. But in terms of how we've gotten here, what are the different facets or events that brought us here, and who are the people who are instrumental in propagating and preserving the Dikshitar Sampradaya is fascinating for us to see. And we are once again very happy to have presented this for all of you, and we'd like to thank Guru Amrita again for giving us this opportunity. And
we really enjoyed this process. I hope you did too.
And we just have a few people to thank who are all very gracious in sharing their knowledge, pointing us to resources. Our two gurus, and Dr. Rita Rajan, Dr. N. Ramanathan, Dr. R. S. Jayalakshmi, Srimati Nandini Ramani, Shri V. Shri Ram, Dr. Sumitra Vasudev, Shri Ravi Rajagopalan, who's also here, Dr. Arvind Ranganathan, Shri Lalita Ram, and text resources from the Music Academy Library, where they were so kind and patient in pointing us out and helping pick out every book that we wanted, and audio references from YouTube channels and other people who supported us. So thank you all so much for this, for being here,
Thank
and
you.
hope you
Thank you.
enjoyed what we presented. Thank you.
Just give us a minute. So we are running 10 minutes late for, as I think, this is the final day of the Dikshitar 250 celebrations, and this is the first time we're running late, so please bear with us. We'll be done. Thank you, Aishwarya and Rithvik, for that presentation. It's very important when I was having this conversation with them, this was a very interesting conversation, because we often have to think why we are singing the compositions that we are singing. Was it like this all the way long, or did somebody start singing more? Where did this all start, right? So it's a good conversation to have. I know they need probably, in hindsight, they needed 2 hours at least to present this, but it's okay. I think it has kindled the curiosity of all of us here. So I think we can have a follow-up some other time. But great points made, and I couldn't resist but just calling out some of them, because there's always this talk, the Sri Subramanya Namaste that you played, very interesting, because it had the second and third speed, whereas SSP, as it printed, has a first and second speed. And today we sing first, second, and third speeds of Manasija Koti. So they played a recording of Salem Godavari, singing 1930s, right? 60s, or 60s, okay. So that is very interesting observation there. Kamalambam Bhajare also, that was played, I think it was Arikudi Ramanujangar's rendition. And the first line was Apdi, as is there in the Pradarshini, starting from the Gandharam and with the Varjaswaram, the Dhamma Magas, and it was outstanding. This Mahaganapathim Vande and the publication that they were talking about, right? The Tirupambaram Natarajasundaram Pillai publication. Very interesting part of that aspect about that publication is that it lists 50 compositions. Of course, the only non-SSP composition, like they mentioned, was the Mahaganapathim Vande. But the order of listing of the compositions follows the raga tradition of as listed in the Sampradaya Pradarshini. So, for example, you will find first they start with the Kanakambari Melam, then Ratnangi, Penadyuti, the entire this Raganga Raga scheme, right? Kanakambari, Penadyuti, Samavarali, and so on. So much so that Sahana, you will see the 20th Mela Kirtanams and 21st. They don't give Mela numbers. You will find the 20th Mela Kirtanams, 21st Mela Kirtanams, 22nd Mela Kirtanams. Under that, you will find Sahana also. So, whereas the notation points to Antaragandharam and the way it's sung today in the contemporary Sahana, but the listing follows the 22nd Mela. So, if you see the ordering of the compositions in the Natarajasundaram Pillai book, that was again a very, very interesting point about that book. This discussion about Sangita Sampradaya Parashni Kirtanams and non-SSP Kirtanams, I know many students of music out there who participate in the competitions that we conduct as well, and both of them have also been judging some of these competitions along with other musicians. So we always have this discussion, And the stance is very clear, right, in the sense that there are 229 compositions of Muthuswami Dikshitar as published in the Pradarshini. From Guru Amrita, I mean, our focus has been, okay, let's focus on those 229. The discussion about whether a kirtanam which is not there in the Pradarshini is authentic or not is a wider discussion. So, I think on the 229 first ஒழுங்கா பாடலாம் அந்த பாடம் பண்ணிட்டு பாடலாம் அப்படிங்கிறது தான் எங்களோட stance. We are not taking a call on whether a particular kirtanam is authentic or not. I think that requires participation from scholars of music and a wide variety of people. The final takeaway that I really found enlightening was the role of popular musicians and the role of performing musicians. And they made a brilliant point about that and how as performers, less popular, more popular. In fact, there was a very interesting thing about All India Radio as an avenue for compositions which were not concert ready. So there was an avenue for singing compositions which one would feel that idu kachirila paada mudiyadhu ana radio la paadalam. So this avenue was again a very important avenue because that made sure that a lot of kirtanams were sung and were heard by followers of music. And finally, like I said, the role of celebrations. That was again a very good call out because 1904 Pradarshini publish ஆகுது அதுக்கப்புறம் ஒரு burst of compositions come. 70s the Tamil translation of the Pradarshini 61. அதுக்கப்புறம் ஒரு burst of compositions come. 75 bicentenary, again a burst of compositions enter the concert repertoire. And hopefully 2025 we have 250 and hopefully this again triggers an increase in the number of Dikshitar kirtanams that are sung and appreciated. So thank you so much to Aishwarya, Vidya, Raghunath, Rithvik, Raja, and thank you. So while we get ready for the next, I invite Vidwan Vijay Shiva, Vidwan Vidushi Dr. R. Hemalata, Vidwan J. Vaidyanathan, along with Sri Vigneshwaran and Sri Swaminathan to occupy the stage. While they occupy the stage, because it's the final day, I'd like to just thank a bunch of people without taking too much time. That way we'll be doing it parallelly. All the supporters who made this Dikshitar 250 happen. Honestly, the plan பண்றச்ச இது இவ்வளோ வேலை இருக்கும் அப்படிங்கிற யாரும் எதிர்பார்க்கல குதிச்சிட்டோம். Then we took things as it came, and so on behalf of Guru Amrita, I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the supporters, Sri Ganesh, Sri Murli, the Anand Srinivasan, then Mr. Sesasai sir, Chamundeshwari Sugars, bunch of people who have extended their support in various forms. My thanks to all the artists, the lecture demonstrations, the concerts, amazing participation, amazing quality, amazing insight that we all enjoyed. So my heartfelt thanks to them. Thanks to Ragasudha Hall, Srimati Jaya Balakrishnan, Shekhar, who's here? Where's Shekhar? Shekhar Vellarpar. So Shekhar and his team for all the arrangements through this Dikshitar 250 festival. Sri Raja for the projector on all 6 days. Audio by Trinavakar and T. Pandian and all of them here. Thank you for the wonderful audio. Video, we had Muthukrishnan Manivanan and his team, Balaji, Deena. Thank you to all of them. All the social media was handled by Alap, so thanks to Akhila and her team. If Anisha is here, so thanks Anisha. The bags, you saw the banner that you see here, as well as the tote bags that we got printed as that we got done to raise awareness and as well to raise some funds for as part of Dikshitar 250 was designed by Sri Subramanya and the team at Think Good. So thank you to all of them. Thanks to Vignesh, who all the gifts and giveaways that we gave to the artists as a token of gratitude had some really good smelling coffee. So that's thanks to Mr. Vignesh of Davara Coffee for that. Thanks to all the audience, each of you who has come in such large numbers, such encouraging numbers throughout the festival. Thank you. It was really inspiring. And thanks to the students, my students and their families, all of them have worked tirelessly through this to make this festival happen. Thank you. And so please support the cause in whatever way possible. Please be part of this movement. And thank you once again. I'll let the artists occupy the stage, and after they occupy the stage, we'll just extend a warm token of our gratitude to them, and then the kacheri will begin. Thank you.